Welcome to the Magical Experiments live stream. And we're going to wait a moment. Okay, hey, Taylor, stream. This week, I am exploring the topic of when kids should learn about magic. And this is an interesting topic for me. It came about because, when I was asking people what they would like me to share or post on, um, basically one of the questions asked was, well, when do you think, kids should learn about magic? And the person shared that, her son was, was learning, magic illusion tricks and really seemed fascinated with magic. And I've been thinking about this question for the last couple weeks. I really wanted to give it some thought. And so what I want to share here is from a few different perspectives. Um, the first perspective is from my own experience as a child growing up, and what my experience with religion was, because I think that informs this perspective a bit. The other perspective is as the perspective of a step parent in this case. I have two step kids, and one of them practices magic. The other one doesn't really seem interested, and that's okay. But I want to talk a bit about that. And then the final perspective really is just my own perspective, as a magic practitioner and as someone who, has really started learning magic when I was 16. The one caveat I want to put all to this is just my opinion, and you guys may be surprised by my opinion when I share this. So, I just want to make it very clear. It is just my opinion. You don't have to agree or disagree or anything. I mean, you can do whatever you want, but I was asked, and anytime someone asks my perspective on something, I'm gonna shoot straight with you and give you my perspective. So here it is. I actually don't think kids should learn magic. I know that probably surprises you. Like, what? Wait a minute, why not? And here's why. Um, I, as a kid, remember being forced to go to church when I was a kid, and I hated it. I hated every single moment of it. I would be dragged by my stepmom to go to church. My dad never went, and I always thought that was hypocritical. I even said one time, "Why doesn't he have to go? Why do I have to go?" And her answer was, "Well, you're a kid, you have to go to church, and he doesn't have to. He's an adult. He can make his own choices." And I thought that was ridiculous. But I remember being forced to go to church and go to Sunday school, and I really didn't like that experience. And when I later on went to live with my mom, I didn't like that experience either, where it was, well, you're not 18 yet, you have to go to church, you have to do what I tell you to do because you're a kid. Well, I'll tell you something. Kids are pretty smart, and they're able to figure things out for themselves if they want to. um the reason, then you might say, well, then Taylor, why are you saying that you don't think kids should practice magic? Let me phrase that a little differently. I don't think that parents should try and get their kids to practice magic. I think that if a kid shows interest in magic, the best thing you can do is encourage their interest without necessarily, being blatant about it. If they want to participate in a ritual that your magical community is involved in, then by all means let them come along. If they don't want to participate, don't force them. Don't be my stepmom who, was like, you have to come and go to church. Don't do that to your kid when it comes to your own practices. If they want to do it, let them choose to do it. The thing of it is that, my own approach as a step parent, and admittedly my stepkids came into my life when, like, one was like 12 and the other was like 9. um but it was very hands off, and part of that is because, I'm a step parent, and but part of it also was out of that very real fact that I didn't want to force my own spiritual beliefs or practices down their throats. And, like, in the case of my of the one step kid, he doesn't seem to be interested at all. And in the case of the other, I mean, she's kind of doing her own thing and learning and making her own choices in that regards. And I'm just content to let her do that. If she wants to ask me advice, she can. If she wants my perspective, she can get it. If she doesn't, that's okay too. Because, not because the thing too is that, like, my spiritual path, my magical path may not be the same as hers. So it's not for me to force my perspectives or beliefs on her. I grew up in this situation where I had people basically forcing their religious practices down my throat. First my stepmom, then my mom. And I started practicing magic when I was 16. I was fascinated with magic early on. I mean, I remember as a kid, I was reading fantasy books probably like by the time I was 6 or 7 years old. I was like reading The Hobbit, and then I started reading some other stuff. I started reading, Dragonlance and Forgotten Realms by the time I was like a preteen, early teenager. And I always found the story of Raistlin in particular to be fascinating, probably because I could really identify with him. Here's this guy who wasn't really liked, and everyone picked on him, but he had this magical power, and that was his first love. And I guess it's fair to say that even now that influence is there. I was recently reading the Dragonlance series and realizing, with a bit of dismay as well as a sense of approval, like kind of a mixed feeling, like, I'm a lot like this guy. Like, there's things about him I don't like that I see in myself. He's got a real temper, and I do too. I know it doesn't seem like that, but I do have a bit of a temper. I've learned to temper it over time, but and definitely like his selfishness. I mean, that's another aspect of myself that I will admit I don't care for. I can be a very selfish person. I've worked hard on it, but it's something I'm still dealing with to some degree or another. Probably will be the rest of my life. Some people would say I can be very generous, and that's kind of them to say, but I can also be very selfish, and I know that, and I'm trying to be a better person. I guess really that's all we can ask for. But as a kid, I read these stories and I wished that magic was real. I wanted it to be real. And then, when I found out that it was real at the age of 16, when this one kid, he sat me down, and irony of ironies, so far as I know, he actually is a Catholic now, which I find hilarious. But anyway, this kid sat me down and he said, I had this experience where I experienced these demons on the astral plane, and he told me this story to mess with me because I was reading fantasy books, and so he thought, I'm going to mess with him and see how he reacts. The last thing he expected was that I was going to be like, well, show me more and tell me more, I want to learn more. And he blinked and was like, wow. And I told him to bring me some books, and I started reading those books and I started practicing. Now I practice magic in a household where my mom, pretty hardcore Christian. She suspected what I did. She, I didn't tell her what I was doing, but she certainly suspected it. And then she found out, after I turned 18, but it was my senior year of high school. And how she found out about it was that one of my other friends was borrowing some of my books, and his parents went through his room and found out, and asked him. And so he told them. And so they called my mom and told her, and she ended up confronting me about it after a couple of days of tense stress and everything else. Like and she was like, you have a choice to make. You can either choose to burn your books, or you can go and move out. Now, I want to frame this in the context of the time that I was 18. I was technically an adult, but let's be honest here. At 18, you're not an adult. Um, Certainly not in this day and age. I mean, maybe at one time, you know, half a century ago, maybe before that, people, I would say before that, really. But and nowadays, let's be brutally honest here. People don't become adults until maybe, if they're lucky, their late 20s, because hopefully by that time they've moved out of their parents' house. They may think of themselves as adults, but nobody who's in their early 20s, unless they're already living on their own and paying their own bills, is an adult. Sorry, not sorry for telling you that, but it's true. I was living on my own by the time I was 20 years old. And then, once you're living on your own and paying your bills, that's when you become an adult. You don't become an adult before then, in my opinion, because you don't know what it's like to have to take care of yourself. You've got other people taking care of you. Anyway, let's get back from that tangent to where we're at here now. Um, I was 18 at the time. I didn't have a job, and it was my last year of high school, and I had to make a tough decision, an adult decision, I suppose you could say. I had to decide between, do I let my mom burn my books and stay and live and at least live there long enough to at least graduate from high school, or do I move out and try and tough this out on my own with a half a tank of gas, a car that isn't legally mine, like my mom could take it from me, and you know what do I do? It was one of the hardest choices of my life. It involved me making a decision that really came right down to being a very practical decision. I made the decision to let my mom burn my books. I didn't even give her all the books. I hid some of them away, because I didn't because I hid away the books that I hadn't read, or the books that I really worked with a lot. But I gave her some books that I'd already read and learned stuff from. She made me burn my some comic books, the books of magic, original printing, I might add. Still ticks me off to this day because it had the word magic in it. But I burned them. I took them back. She made me light the fire myself, and I burned them. That was one of the hardest decisions I ever made in my life. To this day, she hasn't apologized for it. She feels like I was wrong for not telling her about my spiritual beliefs, even though I knew I knew what her response was going to be. That her response was going to be exactly what happened. And I stand by the fact that I made that decision. I made the right decision at the time. Some people would say, "Oh, you made the coward's choice. You chose the comfort of your home." No, I made the adult decision to focus on finishing off school and getting out of high school and choosing to live in a somewhat hostile environment, but not as bad as it could have been. And believe me, I grew up in a much more hostile environment initially, so I know the difference. But I made that choice because, as much as it sucked to burn those books in order to have a home and finish off high school, that was more important to me. And it really was, in a very real sense, one of my first adult decisions. I mean, I think my first adult decision was when I told my dad I wanted to move out, and was really scared and depressed about what he was going to potentially do, when I told him that at the age of 14. But in this case, um, I made that decision, and I chose to stick with graduating from high school, and I'm glad I did, because I don't know if that would have happened otherwise. If I'd had a job at the time, it might have been different. I might have been like, yeah, I'm making some money. I can figure this out. I can find a place to live, and I can sort things out from there. But it wouldn't have been as easy a choice as the one I made. And so, getting back to the original question, when should kids learn magic? The thing I'm always going to say is it really boils down to, how do you want them to learn? Do you want to force it down their throats the way that, like, I experienced with my stepmom, and later on with my mom, with their respective religious practices? If you don't, then the key thing you have to do is actually just let them decide on their own. And the thing is that so many people have this weird relationship with kids where they, on the one hand, they treat them as beings who can't make their own decisions. Like, oh, the adults have to make decisions for you. or at least that certainly seemed to be more so the business of the day back when I was a kid. Um, I think now, quite honestly, I think now parents cater to their kids too much and spoil them, and kids aren't learning how to become adults in the same way. I know I sound like a crusty old fart, but there you go. The fact of the matter is, we all have to grow up at some time, and if you're trying to take away the pain of life from somebody, you're not doing them any favor. So that's just my perspective again on that. So I think that, when kids should learn magic ultimately boils down to, when are they interested in it? If a kid shows an interest, then you could say to them, well, hey, here's my books. If you want to read some stuff, if you ever want to talk about it, I'd be open to it. If you want to come to some of our, community rituals or stuff like that, that's great. And let the kid decide. And if the kid wants to go, then great. And if they don't, then that's okay too. You can't make that decision for them. And I think the last thing that we as pagans and occultists or anything like that should do is basically set up a similar situation to where it's like it's expected, well, you're going to go to the satanic mass on Sunday. And I'm joking, folks, okay? Although I'm sure if any of you are Christians who are watching that, you're probably freaking out anyway, about more than just that. But or if you're going to come to it's time to go to the Beltane gathering or whatever else, like don't do that. If they want to go, let them go. If they don't show any interest, then let them pursue their own interest. Let them figure their lives out. Give them enough independence to do that, and enough discipline to help them, grow up. Because, that's your job as a parent. Your job as a parent isn't to be their friend. It's to teach them how to become adults and how to take care of themselves. Again, that's my opinion, but I think that's really where at least in the US, we're going wrong. Too many people are trying to be friends with their kids instead of just focusing on teaching them how to become adults. And, my own experiences do inform this. In my case, I wanted to practice magic. I wanted to learn it. And there were reasons for that. I grew up in a situation where I didn't have a lot of power in my life. If it really boils down to it, why did I start practicing magic? Because I wanted power. I wanted a sense of control in my life. And that's what magic could give me. And that was something no one could take away. And that's why, when I was 16 and found out that magic was real, I started practicing it. But I can guarantee you I was pretty atypical in some ways. I practiced it every single day. I was reading books. I was trying stuff every single freaking day. I still do to this day. Because I just had this love for this, and it meant something within me. I've always been a very curious person, and I've always wanted to learn, I've always wanted to have my questions answered and things, and that was my way of doing it. And I think, really, when it comes down to it, kids in general probably feel that way. I don't know. It's just on observing kids, that seems to be the case. So, again, let them figure it out for themselves. Trust them, and yeah, that's my perspective. So, if I've offended any of you, I'm not going to apologize. You asked for my opinion, and there it is. At the end of the day, if your kids show interest, then let them learn about it. If they want to learn directly from you, then teach them. But also be prepared, quite honestly, that your kid's going to think you're dumb because you're an adult and you don't know what you're talking about. Because that's how kids are. That's how I was as a teenager. It's how you were as a teenager, and I guarantee it's how your kid is too. Because that's just the way it works. It's part of that normal development. All right, thanks for watching, and see you guys next week.